Good morning. Have to say I'm a little bit behind with doing these videos, so I'm going to do a few in a trot right now. But this one is about what I read in April, which is quite a while ago now, but I think I remember what I thought about all the books. The first book I read is going to take a little bit of explaining. As anyone who knows me knows, I am fascinated with the ideas of religion and what people believe in. I'm a complete atheist. I don't believe in any deity at all. So I do find it fascinating how people do believe in things. I also love reading about things like flat earth and conspiracy theories. Doesn't mean I agree with them, doesn't mean I believe in them. I just like reading about them because I'm interested in why people hold these views and what the sort of views they hold. So this book was the April book in the book club my daughters did from the charity shop, and it is called The Case for Islamophobia. And this is possibly the most revolting book I have ever read. I didn't get all the way through it. I got about to chapter 9, and I had to give up because it was so vile. It basically is saying that we're completely right to believe, to fear Islam and to want to stop it, because Islam states that it would like the whole world to be Islamic, basically. It basically accused Islam of every atrocity that you could imagine because it says somewhere in the Quran these statements. Well, it's going to say it says all of the same things somewhere in the Bible, Christian Bible. And it's no different. It's simply attributing all the worst aspects of religion to Islam whilst pretending that Christianity has never done anything wrong. It was really horrible, absolutely horrible. I just can't bear it. It was awful. So that was the first book, possibly the horriblest book I've ever attempted to read. As I say, I didn't get very far through it before I couldn't stomach anymore. But it was interesting to read it and to read just how people can have these views reinforced by people saying, oh yeah, but this I can't think what's the name of the Islamic priest, said one day, once, 20 years ago, he said this, which means that all Muslims want to commit genocide against all Christians. That was basically the tone of it. It was horrible, and I really didn't like it. But it was interesting to the bit I did read, and I was glad I read it. I really didn't realise books this vile was still in circulation, but it was. So, horrible book. Wouldn't recommend it to anybody. After that, as a bit of a reducer back, I read some of the Arabs and the Holocaust. And it talks a little bit, this is a little bit about the Arab-Israeli war. Again, I didn't read a lot of it. I only read a couple of essays out of it, but I read it after the other one just to get my head straight. Again, it's a bit heavy going, this. I found it a bit too much for me at the time. But it's a really, really good book. Basically, it says the Arab-Israeli conflict goes far beyond the wars waged on Middle Eastern battlefields. There is also a war of narratives revolving around the two defining traumas of the conflict, the Holocaust and the Nakba. One side is charged with Holocaust denial, the other with exploiting a tragedy while denying the tragedy of others. So a lot of very interesting concepts in this book. So I read a couple of chapters of this afterwards. Then I read The Explorer by Katherine Rundell. This is a children's book, young adults book. I read it because I was at my daughter's house and I hadn't got anything on me to read, and I just wanted to read something, so I picked this up because I thought the cover looked exciting. And the premise: when their plane crashes, 4 children are stranded in the Amazon jungle. Now they have to survive alone, but was someone there before them? It was all right. It wasn't great. I didn't love it. I thought the characters were a bit one-dimensional. There wasn't really anything out of the ordinary about it. There's hundreds and hundreds of these sorts of novels around, and this was just another one of them. But for a youngster who's not read any of those novels before, they'd probably love this. But for somebody who's read other ones, it was just a little bit same as all the others. But it was okay for what it was. Then I read Will Self, The Book of Dave. This is a post-apocalyptic book. It wasn't, well, it's half post-apocalyptic. It wasn't from the book of, this was one that was just recommended. It wasn't one of the book club books that I have. The basic premise of this was that there was a cabbie in London cabbie called Dave, who was going through a bit of a crisis in his life and was writing it all down. And then several hundred years later, after the apocalypse has happened, people dig it up and it becomes the holy Bible of that community, the Book of Dave. It was good. I did enjoy it. However, when they are talking in the future, the language, English language has moved on as it would all be the same. And those bits were written in that modern English, and it was a little bit difficult to read through that. But there were some really interesting ways that the language had moved forward. And some of the things that words that we use now were being used in slightly different ways. Let's see if I've got some here. Oh, this is a good one. A map was no longer called a map, it was called an A to Z, because obviously that was the way we use now. Paper was just called A4. Pigs were called bacon. So it wasn't like it was completely sort of out of ordinary. It also introduced these sort of semi-human, semi-pig kind of creatures, which I felt wasn't really useful for the story and wasn't really very good. And I felt that was a bit grim, that side of it. But I did like the book. I'm not going to say I didn't like the book. I did. It wouldn't encourage me to read any more of Will Self, but it was good. I did like it. Then I read Diane Cook, The New Wilderness. This was a book from the End of the World Reading Club. It's not one I'd heard of before. And this is a situation where everybody's living in enclaves in the future, and they send a group of people volunteer to go and live outside the enclave in the way that hunter-gatherers lived many years ago, thousands of years ago. And it was quite interesting to see how modern people would take to hunter-gathering. And then, of course, there's some conflict that comes in the end, and it all changes. But that was really interesting. It was a bit slow. I think quite a few people found it a bit slow. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good book. Really enjoyed it. Then in April, me and my daughters, we went to a show, a theatre event called 3 Acres and a Cow. And it was all about land rights and how over the last basically 1,000 years since predominantly since the Norman invasion, the rights to the land have been stripped away from ordinary people and have been centred more and more in the hands of a very few people. It was fascinating, absolutely brilliant show. Go and see it if you ever get the opportunity to. But one of the things that they gave us a leaflet with the sort of songs you had to sing through it and things like that. And one of the things on there was a book list, which obviously meant I spent a bit of money on books. And one of the books that I got out of it was Elmet. And this was probably one of the best books I've ever read. It was brilliant. It was about a family, a man and his 2 children who want to live as far away off the grid as they possibly can. And they've got a patch of land that belongs to them, and they try and build a life on this land where they're hunting, gathering, that kind of thing, all the way through that wood. And basically it was just the modern world came crashing in on them in the most horrific and barbaric way imaginable. And just goes to show, if anybody does try to exert those land rights that we should have, the people in power are not going to let you. But absolutely loved it. Very dark book, very dark. But I thought it was absolutely brilliant. It says, Daniel is heading north. He is looking for someone. The simplicity of his early life with Daddy and Kathy has turned menacing and fearful. They lived apart in the house that Daddy built for them in the woods with his bare hands. They foraged and hunted. Kathy was more like their father, fierce and full of simmering anger. Danny was more like their mother, gentle and kind. Sometimes their father disappeared and would return with a rage in his eyes. But when he was at home, he was at peace. He told them that the little copse in Elmet was of theirs alone, but that wasn't true. Local men, greedy and watchful, began to circle like vultures. All the while, the terrible violence in Daddy grew. So I'd say it is a very dark book, but it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. Really, really loved it. So that was Elmet by Fiona Mosley. Then I read, this is a graphic novel, Tales of Carnival Row. This is a series on Netflix, Prime, can't remember, one of them, that was done for 2 seasons, and then it was one of the things that fell sort of victim to COVID, in that it meant that they had to stop filming, and it never really went after the 2nd season. But this was kind of the story that was going to be in there for the 3rd series, but never got made. But I absolutely loved it, and when I binge watched the actual series, I wanted to read the novel, so there wasn't any more from it, so I had to get this, Carnival Row. But very, very good. If you've seen it, you'll know. So that's just that one. And then the final book I read in April was The Enchanted April. This is a book, somebody that I quite like. YouTube, I quite like. I started a book club where you're going to read a book through them a year that fits in with that period of time of year. And this was the first one, The Enchanted April. Not a book I would ever have picked up for my own. 4 women with very different backgrounds and characters. The artless Lottie Wilkins, the pious Rose Arbuthnot, the cantankerous Mrs. Fisher, and the haughty Lady Caroline Dexter respond to an advertisement in the Times offering a medieval castle for rent in Italy that April. As their joint holiday begins, tensions flare up between them, and they soon hand over their past misfortunes and rediscover hope and the pleasures of life in their tranquil surroundings. It was published in 1922. I actually quite enjoyed this. Surprisingly, it's not the sort of book I'd normally read. It was about very rich people being a bit entitled in a castle in, where was it? France? Italy? Italy. But it was interesting. It was interesting watching them all get to know each other and find out why people act the way they do. As you can tell, I fell asleep with it in the bath and dropped it in the water, and picking it up now to do this, I've realised it's actually started to go mouldy. So this book will be going in the bin in 5 minutes' time, but not because it was a bad book, but because it's gone mouldy. So that was The Enchanted April, and that was the last book that I read in April. So one more thing I just wanted to mention was, in one previous book, I mentioned Life Through Poetry by Norma Watson. This was a poetry book written by somebody who lives just around the corner from me that I loved. It was just to mention that Norma passed away in April, May this year. It was very sad. But yeah, so that was just to honour and remember Norma. Okay, so that was what I read in April. And I will be back. And can you hear the dog barking? Very sorry if you can hear the dog barking. But I will be back for the next month's roundup very soon.